Captain Jason Cole had seen many things in his life, but nothing could prepare him for what he found on the barren world of Zethar 5. The planet was a wasteland of cracked earth and dying forests. Its people crushed under the weight of a war they could not win. Jason had been sent here on a routine mission to scout for any signs of enemy activity, but what he found instead would change his life forever. In a small, deserted village, Jason found her. A young alien girl, no more than 10 years old, sitting alone in the ruins of a collapsed building. Her green skin, smooth and shining despite the dust that covered her, looked almost otherworldly under the harsh sun. Her hair, silver like moonlight, was tangled and unkempt, and her eyes, deep and violet, held a sadness beyond her years. She was clutching something, a small, crystal-like pendant, which sparkled faintly in the sunlight. Jason's heart clenched when he saw her. He had seen too many children like this, orphans of war, lost and abandoned. But this girl was different. She didn't scream or run away when she saw him. Instead, she stared at him with a look of quiet curiosity, as though she was waiting for him to speak. Jason knelt down in front of her, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Hey there, little one. What's your name?" The girl blinked but didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him, and for a moment, Jason wondered if she understood him at all. He repeated the question, this time in a softer tone. "I'm Lyra," she said after a long pause, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking was a difficult thing for her. Jason smiled, his heart softening even more. "Lyra, huh? That's a beautiful name." She didn't reply, but her eyes held a hint of something else, of fear, perhaps, or maybe just uncertainty about what the future held. Jason knew he couldn't leave her here. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he could see that she needed help. His mission was important. Yes, but this was more important. "Where are your parents, Lyra?" he asked, trying again to get more information. Lyra looked down at the ground, clutching the pendant tightly in her small hands. "Gone," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Jason's heart sank. He had seen enough to know that when children said "gone," it usually meant something worse than death. In a world like this, it meant abandonment. It meant survival. "All right," Jason said, standing up and extending a hand to her. "You're coming with me. I won't let anything happen to you." Lyra looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his face as though she were trying to understand if he was telling the truth. After a long moment, she hesitantly took his hand. Jason gently lifted her into his arms, and together, they made their way back to his ship, the Black Dawn. The ship's crew, mostly made up of seasoned soldiers, looked up in surprise when they saw Jason return with the girl. They had expected him to return with a report, not a refugee. But Jason didn't care what they thought. He only cared about the girl in his arms. One of the crew members, a sergeant named Hale, raised an eyebrow as they boarded the ship. "Captain, what's this? We're supposed to be on a mission, not running a daycare." Jason shot him a look that silenced him immediately. "She's coming with us. I'll explain later." Lyra remained silent as Jason carried her through the ship, passing by the other crew members, who stared at her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Jason led her to a small cabin and gently placed her on the bed. "Stay here for a moment," he said, as he left to gather supplies for her. He wasn't sure why he felt such a strong need to protect her, but something about Lyra made him feel as if she were his responsibility now. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him when they first met, like she had no one else to turn to. As Jason walked down the narrow halls of the ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Lyra than met the eye. Her calm demeanor, her unusual pendant, the way she had carried herself despite the obvious hardships she'd faced, it all seemed strange. Too strange to be a coincidence, but Jason wasn't the kind of man to jump to conclusions. He would take care of her, and when the time came, he would figure out what was going on. By the time he returned to the cabin with food and fresh clothes, Lyra was sitting quietly on the bed, staring out of the small porthole at the stars beyond. Jason placed the items in front of her, watching as she cautiously picked up the food and ate in small, measured bites. "I know this is a lot to take in," Jason said, sitting across from her. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. But I'm here to help. Lyra didn't respond at first. She just continued to eat, her eyes glancing up at him now and then. Finally, she put the food down and spoke. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice quiet but with a sharpness that caught Jason off guard. Jason paused. That was the question he had been asking himself since he'd found her. He didn't have an answer. Not a good one, anyway. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because I couldn't just leave you there. No one should be alone in a place like that." Lyra looked down at the pendant she still held tightly in her hands. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, as if the question had stirred something deep inside her. Jason wasn't sure if she even understood how much danger she had been in, or what kind of life she had led before. But he knew one thing. She was safe now, at least for the moment. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked, her gaze shifting to the stars outside the porthole. Jason thought about it for a moment before answering. "Home. We're headed to a human colony. It's not much, but it's a safe place." "You'll be all right there," Lyra nodded, though it was clear she didn't fully understand. She had no concept of home, the way humans did. To her, the stars were all she had ever known. Jason stood up, giving her a reassuring smile. "Get some rest, all right? We'll talk more later." As he left the room, he couldn't help but wonder who this girl really was. He had no idea what secrets she was hiding, or where she had come from. But one thing was certain. Her life had been changed forever the moment he had found her. And now, for better or worse, she was part of his world. Life aboard the Black Dawn slowly settled into a new routine after Lyra's arrival. Jason kept her safe in the ship's quarters, away from most of the crew. It was not out of any fear, but rather because he didn't know how to explain her presence to them. Most of them had seen the horrors of war and the suffering of refugees, but Lyra was different. There was something about her that made Jason uneasy, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The girl, for her part, adapted quickly. She was quiet and didn't ask many questions, but every day she grew more curious about her new surroundings. Her eyes often wandered to the windows, where the stars stretched out in endless patterns. Jason didn't know where she came from or how far her world had been from his own, but he had the strange feeling that Lyra was no ordinary child. One evening, a small incident made Jason's suspicions begin to take root. The ship had docked at a trade station for supplies, and Jason was on the bridge, overseeing the exchange with the station's merchant ships. It had been a typical stop, nothing out of the ordinary, but when he returned to the crew quarters, he found Lyra standing near one of the ship's engines, staring intently at it. Jason stopped in his tracks, watching as she reached out a hand. Without touching the console, the engine began to hum softly, and the lights above them flickered to life. Lyra's eyes were wide, and she looked at the machine as though she could sense it, understand it in ways Jason couldn't. "Lyra?" Jason asked, stepping forward carefully. His voice was calm, but his heart was racing. She turned around, her violet eyes meeting his. I didn't mean to," she said softly, stepping back from the console, as if she were afraid it might explode at any moment. Jason approached her slowly. "What did you do?" he asked, his tone even more cautious now. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands, as if expecting them to be glowing or sparking. "I don't know," she whispered. "It just felt like it wanted to work. I made it work." Jason studied her for a long moment. Something was wrong, something he couldn't explain. He knew nothing about alien species or their technology, but there was no way this girl could have fixed a vital piece of ship machinery with just her touch. There had to be more to her than he'd realized. "All right," Jason said, after a long pause. "Stay away from the ship's systems for now, okay?" Lyra nodded without protest, though Jason could see the confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand why it was a problem. To her, it had simply been an instinct. Something told her how to fix the machine, and she had followed it. For the next few days, Jason kept a close eye on her. He made sure she stayed in her quarters, where she read books about human technology and the stars, anything to distract her from touching anything dangerous. But as much as Jason tried to focus on the mission, he couldn't ignore the growing unease that gnawed at him. There was something about Lyra that felt different. Like she wasn't just a survivor of war, but something far more significant. One evening, during a routine patrol, the unease turned into something more serious. The ship's sensors picked up an unidentified ship, one that didn't match any known signals. Jason stood at the bridge, scanning the display as the unknown ship grew closer. It was a dark, sleek vessel, almost like a shadow in space, and its approach was anything but peaceful. "Captain," Lieutenant Ferris, his communications officer, spoke up. "It's a pirate vessel. They've already disabled the outer defense grid." Jason cursed under his breath. "Red alert. All hands to battle stations." The crew scrambled to prepare for the assault, but Jason knew that time was against them. He quickly turned to Ferris. "Send a distress signal to the nearest fleet. We won't hold out long." As the crew worked quickly to prepare for the worst, Jason's mind was already working through their options. The pirates were ruthless, and their reputation for overwhelming superior forces with sheer numbers was well known. But in the back of his mind, another thought lingered: Lyra. If they were to be boarded, she'd be in danger. Jason stormed to her quarters, hoping to get her to safety before the pirates made their move. But when he reached the door, it opened by itself. Lyra stood in the doorway, her eyes glowing faintly. She was calm, too calm for a child who had just been thrown into a war zone. "Lyra?" Jason asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "I can help," she said, her voice low and steady. There was no fear in her tone, just a quiet certainty. Jason's heart skipped a beat. "No, you stay in your quarters. It's too dangerous." "I can help," she repeated, this time more firmly. "I know how." Jason didn't know what she meant, but there was something about the way she spoke that made him hesitate. The look in her eyes, those violet, glowing eyes, told him she was serious. Something inside him told him that Lyra wasn't just another scared refugee. She had something more. Something dangerous. Before he could stop her, Lyra walked past him and headed toward the bridge. She wasn't listening to him. He followed quickly. But by the time he reached the control room, it was too late. Lyra had already taken her place at the control console. The crew members watched in shock as Lyra sat down, her fingers moving across the holographic controls. The ship shook violently as pirate fighters attempted to board, but the screens flashed as Lyra manipulated the systems with a fluid, effortless grace. Jason stood frozen, his mouth hanging open as he watched her do what no human could. The pirate fighters that had been closing in on the Black Dawn suddenly froze in midair. A blue energy field shimmered around them, trapping them in place. With a series of sharp commands from Lyra, the pirate ships were ejected into space, the force field holding them until the pirates were scattered into the void. The crew stared at Lyra, stunned into silence. Jason couldn't speak. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Lyra had taken control of the ship's systems in a way that seemed almost unnatural. It wasn't just that she had done something amazing, it was how effortlessly she had done it. It was as if she had known exactly how the ship worked, like she was born to command it. "What the hell was that?" Lieutenant Ferris asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. Jason didn't have an answer. He turned to Lyra, his voice quiet but firm. "Lyra, what did you do?" Lyra stood up from the console, her eyes dimming as the energy around them faded. I just did what needed to be done," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. The crew was still speechless. Jason wasn't sure if they were scared or amazed, or a little bit of both. But the truth was clear now. Lyra was not just a refugee. She wasn't just some orphan he had picked up by accident. She was something far beyond human understanding, and whatever she was, Jason knew one thing for certain. Her presence aboard the Black Dawn was no coincidence. As Jason turned to face the crew, his thoughts were racing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. There was something bigger at play. something he didn't fully understand. And it was up to him to figure it out. But for now, he had one thing to focus on: protecting Lyra. Whatever she was his responsibility now, and he wasn't going to let anyone take her from him. The days after the pirate attack were quiet, almost too quiet. Jason couldn't shake the memory of Lyra's strange display of power, the way she had effortlessly controlled the ship's systems and sent the pirate ships tumbling into space. She had saved them, there was no doubt about that, but at the same time, something about the whole situation didn't sit right with Jason. He had never seen anything like it before, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the answers he was looking for were within Lyra herself. Lyra, for her part, seemed unchanged. She was still the same quiet girl she had always been, though Jason could see her looking at the stars more often, her expression thoughtful and distant. She hadn't said much since the incident, and when Jason tried to bring it up, she simply looked away, as if she didn't want to talk about it. But Jason knew they couldn't just ignore it. He had to find out who she really was, and there was only one way to do that. One night, as the ship drifted through deep space, Jason made up his mind. He couldn't keep going in the dark. He had to ask Lyra directly. He had to know what was going on. He found her in the observation room, sitting by the large windows, staring out into the vast expanse of stars. Her face was lit by the soft glow of the distant sun, and she looked lost in thought. "Lyra," Jason said softly, stepping into the room. She turned to look at him, her violet eyes meeting his with an unreadable expression. "Captain," she replied, her voice as quiet as ever. Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach the subject. "I need to ask you something," he said finally, sitting down beside her. "About what happened with the pirates. How did you do that?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She simply stared at the stars for a moment longer, her fingers lightly tracing the pendant around her neck. Jason could see the hesitation in her eyes, the conflict inside her. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know how to explain it," she said slowly, her voice almost too soft to hear. I felt it, like the ship was calling to me. And when I touched it, everything just made sense." Jason leaned forward, his curiosity growing. "But it wasn't just that, was it? You did something more. You controlled the systems. You stopped those ships in mid-air. That's not something any normal person can do." Lyra's gaze shifted away from him, her eyes flicking to the pendant once again. She seemed lost in thought, as though struggling to find the right words. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not a normal person," she said, her tone heavy with sadness. "I'm not like you. Or like anyone else." Jason frowned, a chill running down his spine. "What do you mean?" Lyra took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the pendant. "I come from a place far away, from a world you can't even imagine. My people, they were different. They were powerful." Jason's mind raced. He had heard stories of alien species with advanced abilities, but nothing that sounded anything like what Lyra was describing. "Powerful how?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and concern. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. "My people were called the Valara," she said softly. "We ruled the stars. We were the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. But we were destroyed. We were." Jason's heart skipped a beat. The Valara? He had never heard of them. But the way Lyra spoke, it was as though she were recounting the history of a forgotten empire. "What happened to your people?" he asked gently, not wanting to push her too hard but needing to understand. Lyra took another deep breath, her gaze turning distant, as though the memories were painful to relive. "The Syndicate," she whispered. "They came for us. They wanted to destroy everything we had built, everything we were. They were afraid of us, afraid of our power, and so they attacked. My people fought back, but they were no match for the Syndicate. They killed my family." Jason's stomach tightened at her words. He could feel the weight of her grief, the loss of a world she would never see again. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and sincere. Lyra shook her head, a sad smile flickering on her lips. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "But the worst part is that I'm the last one. The last Valara." Jason sat in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. The last of a powerful and ancient race, exiled to a war-torn planet, hiding her true identity as a refugee. He couldn't even imagine what she had been through. "I was sent away before the final attack," Lyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father, the Emperor, knew what was coming. He sent me away to keep me safe. He hoped that one day I would return to restore our people, to rebuild the Valara dynasty. But I don't remember any of it. My memories were sealed to protect me. I didn't know who I was until just recently." Jason felt his heart heavy with sympathy for the young girl. She had been carrying the weight of an entire fallen civilization, all while unaware of her true heritage. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized just how much Lyra had to offer. Her powers, whatever they were connected to the Valara's advanced technology. She had the potential to change the galaxy, to restore the Valara, if she could learn how to control it. "So, what now?" Jason asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "If you're the last of your people, what happens to you?" "To us?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I don't know yet. But I do know that the Syndicate is still out there. And they'll come for me eventually. I can't stay hidden forever." Jason nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. The Syndicate would never let Lyra go. They would want to destroy her, to eliminate any chance of the Valara ever rising again. It was clear that the battle for the galaxy wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. "We'll figure this out," Jason said firmly, standing up and offering her a hand. "Together. You're not alone anymore, Lyra. I won't let them take you." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. "Thank you, Jason. I don't know what to do next. But I know I can't do it alone." "God," Jason smiled, his resolve hardening. "You don't have to. We'll find a way. We'll gather allies, fight the Syndicate, and maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild what was lost." As they stood there together, looking out into the stars, Jason knew that their journey was only beginning. There would be dangers ahead, and many battles to fight. But he also knew that Lyra wasn't just a girl in need of protection. She was the key to something far greater, a future for her people, a future for the galaxy, and Jason would do whatever it took to help her get there. The quiet after the storm was always the hardest part. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the calm surrounding them was just the eye of the hurricane. They were no longer just running from the Syndicate or pirates, they were on a collision course with the heart of the galaxy's greatest power. A force far more dangerous than any enemy they had faced before. And Lyra, the last surviving princess of the Valara dynasty, was at the center of it all. As the days passed, Jason watched Lyra carefully. She had grown quieter in the days following her revelation. She spent more time in her quarters, poring over the data she had retrieved from the ship's systems, trying to learn more about her past, about the Valara. She was no longer the same innocent girl he had found on Zethar 5. She was starting to understand the weight of her legacy, and with it, the fear that the Syndicate would soon be after her. Jason had made it clear to his crew that Lyra was to be protected at all costs. He had no idea what she was capable of. But after what had happened during the pirate attack, he knew that she was more than just a refugee. She was a living weapon, perhaps the galaxy's last hope. They had set course for the Valara homeworld, or what was left of it. According to the data Lyra had managed to unlock from the ship's systems, the planet had been destroyed by the Syndicate in their final assault. It was now nothing but a cold, lifeless ruin, a shadow of the empire it had once been. Still, Lyra insisted that they go there. She needed to know what had happened to her people, to understand the power she had inherited, and to find the pieces of the puzzle that had been scattered across the galaxy. One evening, as they approached the coordinates Lyra had given them, Jason stood at the helm of the Black Dawn, his hands gripping the controls. The silence on the ship was palpable. Even the crew seemed to sense that this was the moment where everything could change. Lyra, standing beside him, was focused on the view screen ahead. Her expression was unreadable, but Jason could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "You ready for this?" Jason asked, breaking the silence. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She just stared at the swirling mass of stars in front of them. "I have to be," she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "There's no going back now," Jason nodded. "No turning back, but whatever happens, we'll face it together." They continued on, the ship pushing forward into the unknown, until the blackness of space ahead of them was pierced by a distant speck of light. It grew larger as they approached, and soon, they were close enough to see the broken remnants of what had once been a thriving world. The planet was a shattered husk, its surface scorched and cracked, craters dotting its landscape like scars. The once majestic cities of the Velera were reduced to rubble, and the few remaining structures were half buried beneath the weight of destruction. "This is it," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Jason glanced at her, his heart heavy with empathy. He had seen the aftermath of war before, planets reduced to ruins, civilizations wiped out, but this was different. This wasn't just the remains of a world, it was the remains of Lyra's home, the place she had once known and loved. The pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "We'll figure this out," Jason said, trying to offer reassurance. "We're here. Let's see what we can find." They landed in what remained of a Velera city, a once grand metropolis now reduced to a skeletal ruin. The crew suited up and prepared to leave the ship, but Lyra was already at the door, stepping out into the dust and rubble without hesitation. Jason followed closely behind her, the others trailing at a respectful distance. They didn't speak as they made their way through the desolate city, the silence only broken by the sound of their footsteps on the cracked ground. Lyra led them to a central building, its structure still intact but clearly damaged. The doors were rusted shut, but with a single touch, Lyra placed her hand on the metal, and the door hissed open. Jason couldn't help but watch in awe as she effortlessly unlocked the entrance, her fingers dancing over the control panel. It was as if the building itself responded to her. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but the dim lights flickered to life as they entered. The walls were lined with old technology, some of it more advanced than anything Jason had ever seen. Lyra moved through the halls with purpose, her eyes scanning the room, searching for something. It was clear to Jason that she was looking for a specific piece of the puzzle, something that would unlock the rest of her past. They came to a large chamber at the heart of the building, and Lyra stopped in front of a massive, spherical device embedded in the center of the room. It hummed faintly, a soft, eerie glow emanating from its surface. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "This is the heart of the Velera." Jason didn't understand what she meant, but it was clear that this device was important to her. He stepped closer, examining it carefully. "What does it do?" Lyra hesitated, her hand hovering over the glowing surface. "It's the source of our power," she said quietly. "The energy that made the Velera what we were. My people used it to fuel our ships, our cities, everything. It was the core of our technology." Jason watched as she reached out and placed her palm against the device. The glow intensified, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room was alive with energy. Lyra's eyes closed as if she were in a trance, and Jason could see her struggling to connect with the machine. For several long moments, nothing happened. Jason stood still, watching her carefully. He knew this was important, but he also knew the dangers. The Syndicate had already destroyed her people once. They wouldn't hesitate to finish what they started. Then, without warning, the device activated. A loud hum filled the room, and the walls seemed to tremble. Lyra's eyes snapped open, and a strange, otherworldly energy surged through her. She gasped, stumbling back from the machine as the power inside it surged to life. Jason rushed to her side, grabbing her arm to steady her. "Lyra, what's happening?" She looked up at him, her face pale and strained. "I can feel it. The power. It's too much." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "It's part of me. I can control it, but I don't know how to stop it." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the energy in the air, the raw, uncontrolled power surging around them. It was like the entire room was alive, pulsing with an ancient energy that was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. "I need to learn how to control it," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "I can't let it destroy me." Just then, the ship's alarms went off, a loud, shrill noise cutting through the tension. Jason's heart sank. He knew what that meant. "They're here," he said, his voice grim. "The Syndicate. They've found us." Lyra's eyes widened in fear, but there was something else there, something darker. "They won't stop until they've finished what they started. They'll come for me." Jason clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. "Not while I'm still breathing." Without another word, they made their way back to the Black Dawn, but they weren't fast enough. As they reached the landing pad, several Syndicate warships appeared out of the darkness, blocking their escape. Jason's heart raced as he saw the enemy closing in. He knew there would be no easy way out of this, no quick escape. This battle would decide everything. "We have to fight," Jason said, turning to Lyra. "Do you have control of the power now?" Lyra nodded, her eyes steely with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes." Jason looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just a refugee or a child but the true princess of the Velara. The future of an entire galaxy rested on her shoulders, and together, they would face the Syndicate and bring about the fall of the empire that had destroyed her people. And as they stood there, the battle beginning to unfold around them, Jason knew one thing for certain. They were no longer running. They were fighting back.